why is the US so afraid of losing its influence over Africa?
Well, I think the answer is simple because the United States recognizes that it became a superpower through the shameless exploitation of people of African descent. Reference the unlimited African slave trade, for example. The United States exploited the African natural resources, be it rubber in the Congo or gold in South Africa, palladium in South Africa, uranium in Namibia, oil in Angola, oil in Nigeria, natural gas in Algeria. And so there's an old saying in the United States that the people you meet on the way up, you will also meet on the way down. There is a fear that with the United States in precipitous decline, with the rise of China, and of course, the United States helped to assist the rise of China because it was so hysterical about Russia, and I'll get into that in a second. But in any case, there's this real fear that just as Africa was essential to the rise of the United States, if Africa pulls away from the United States, that will help to be a catalytic factor in the decline of the United States. Now, let me return, as I said, to this point about the rise of China. You may recall the Cold War, this titanic conflict between Moscow and Washington, even though the United States likes to boast that the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989, was due to the ineffectiveness of socialism. I think that actually the key factor in both of those collapses was what happened approximately 50 years ago when US President Richard Nixon and his foreign policy aide, Henry Kissinger, brokered an agreement with China on an anti-Moscow basis. This led to massive foreign direct investment of the United States corporations into China. And now, with China benefiting from that relationship, the United States now wants to decouple from China, although that's going to be very difficult because if you look at corporations headquartered in the United States like Apple, Microsoft, Starbucks, Tesla, of course, founded by a man whose roots are in apartheid South Africa, speaking of Elon Musk. All of these corporations' profits are heavily tied to the Chinese market. And it's going to be very difficult to disrupt that relationship. It would be the equivalent of unscrambling the egg. It's virtually impossible. And that's one of the reasons why you had a leading US general in the last 24 to 48 hours telling his men and his women under his command that they should prepare for war with China by 2025, about 2 years from now. And he said the way to prepare is to set up targets of effigies, Chinese effigies, and shoot bullets through their head. That was his advice. This is going to be very problematic, and African nations should recognize that after or if they sign on to a conflict with Russia, next they'll be asked to sign on to a conflict with China. That's a guarantee. All for the purpose of helping to preserve the fragmenting hegemony of US imperialism. And African leaders should ask themselves, why should they sacrifice blood and treasure to guarantee the hegemony of US imperialism? I mean, that obviously makes no sense. But even repeating that nonsensical request, it bespeaks the contempt that Washington has for Africa, insofar as it would expect African nations to sacrifice their own best interests to save the bacon, if you like, of US imperialism. That makes no sense.